from the map that had been hand drawn out. Oh, there it is. Right here. Okay, and then I combined it with the list that's online, and so there were 66 known burials. 66
Are the
names.
Sears on there?
No.
No Sears?
D.B. Sears is buried down in Riverside Cemetery. Old man Sears. Margaret, his wife, it bothered me for a long time because I couldn't find her. And I finally stumbled across her probate when I was messing around in the courthouse one day. She had gone out to Nebraska to visit, I don't know, her mother or relatives, and had died out there. So I don't know where David Sears, Chippeanic, perhaps Chippeanic was started in 1855.
There's a Sears house right at the top of 44th Avenue, a big stucco house. And it had 2 Sears ladies living in there when we moved in the area. And they were in their 70s and 80s.
And you moved in, what, 70 years ago?
1938. And their names were Vesta Sears and Daisy Sears. We used to go blackberry picking together out in Shore or somewhere.
Well, I'm not aware of any. There are no Sears on my lists
That's
of being
strange.
buried.
Well, they're in a different cemetery.
Yeah.
And see, by the time these ladies died, the cemetery was no longer
Yeah.
open.
Active, right? Although I should mention that John Long was buried there in 1978. So strictly speaking, he was the latest burial. John Long is one of the men who was hanged for the murder of George Davenport. His skeleton wound up down in the Rock Island County Courthouse somehow, and then was transferred up to our museum, where it was on exhibit
That's right.
for a number of years. And when the museum was remodeled, they decided that the best thing to do with his skeleton was to bury him.
It was one of the
Yeah.
most popular exhibits in kids.
I know. But what's kind of funny is before he could get buried, of course, there are certain laws that have to be followed, and a death certificate had to be issued. So we have the death certificate of John Long that was issued by the county coroner in 1978. Cause of death, hanging. But he was buried up there. So actually, strictly speaking, he was the last burial, but that's a little bit.
Are those 66 people, are some of those the paupers too?
No, these are names.
These are- the
Now, I
paupers don't
have not
names.
gone so far as to get into the county records. I have no idea if the county, I mean, these were people who were indigent. And so the county paid for their burial. Is there a record kept of who was put into that potter's field? I have not researched that. That, although, you know, if I ever do find an Eagle Scout that would be interested in doing that project, I think that'd be a worthwhile avenue to explore.
The Eagle Scout in 1976, one of the things he did do, the cemetery, was put in a split rail fence to block, not block it off, mark it off, which has since fallen down or been taken down, I'm sure by your lawnmowers, because it's much easier to mow the grass, but I just wanted, if you can find an Eagle Scout that would re-fence it with a split rail fence, I think that would be a good thing to do, because that's when we first moved into this neighborhood, and I drove by and I saw that fence, I thought, that's something special, and then I saw the crosses, and that's a cemetery. So just getting it fenced off somehow, and I know the people who cut the grass would hate me for saying that, but
Well, and I would imagine that that's why that it had fallen into disrepair, as so many things do.
wasn't fixed.
And it was simpler just to replace it by putting those bollards, little short round things, to mark it off. It's much easier to weed eat around those, but I think that you're right, the split rail fence just looks a little more something.
And the holes, potholes in the alley, if you all call City Hall and complain about those potholes, they will fill, at least they did last summer, after we complained a couple of times. So, a few more calls in might get them filled faster. But we don't.
But this was all a part of the property, and I know I'm telling you stuff that you already know. I'm sure everybody here knows a lot more about this than I do. But this property up here was, I believe, and the property that Dickson Cemetery is located on, according to some of the research that I was doing, was part of the Rock Island City paper, city. And that titles were somewhat murky, and one source said that there was a fight between, you know, who actually owned this property, and that there were lawsuits filed, and that David B. Sears won out, and so that's how he got the property, except that you can go to the grantee and grantor indices, or indices, in the Rock Island County Courthouse, and there is the legal document where William Dickson sold this property, which included the south half of the cemetery and then other parts of what became Searstown, for $6,000 to D.B. Sears. Maybe that was their settlement. I don't know. But that land was acquired, purchased by Mr. Sears from William Dickson.
Do you know a lady named Mary Ann, and I think it's Worthy, or something like that? She's a history teacher at Blackhawk, and I'm taking a little course over at Palm University, and she knows a tremendous amount about Quad City history. Would that be any avenue that might help you?
If we were to pursue doing something with the cemetery, any information that anybody can give me, because it's really not very well documented. I thought, oh, this will be a piece of cake. I've got my file, I'll go over to the Historical Society, and I'll be able to, and I find that there is just not a lot that is written about it, and not a whole lot of research that's been done. So that might be, yeah, if she's familiar with,
I can
it would
ask
be
her.
good, sure.
Seems to be a Spanish history, Quad City history, modern history.
Well, and I think that this would have been the resting place of a number of people who were residents of Searstown. There are a number of burials in the, excuse me, 1890s and early 1900s. I'd say probably 15 of the 66 burials are from that.
Glance at the name list
Oh,
of the
sure.
cemetery.
Let me get it to you by name. I know I've got it in here. I was throwing stuff together.
Maybe some of my friends are there.
What year did Colonel Davenport come here, do you know?
George Davenport came here during the War of 1812.
'Cause
I believe he
remember
came here
reading
with the
someplace
army.
that-
No, after the War of 1812. He came here as sutler to the fort.
I remember reading someplace that they were one of the first white families.
They
here.
were the first white family living in this area. They lived out on the island, and I'll tell you, he must have been a, don't tell me I left that at home. Well, here, just use this one. It's not sorted by name, but it will give you the names anyway. Twice, they were going to kick him out of his house on the island. And both times, he managed to pull strings and managed to remain. So he must have been a very slick talker. Very,
You know why they were?
I consider him to be an operator.
Why
but
were they gonna throw him out of his house, do you know?
that was federal land,
Oh, I see, okay.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he
Oh,
built the house. I don't know how he got permission, maybe from whoever was commander at Fort Armstrong. He got permission to build a small cabin. And then I think it was in 1826, there was a letter that came from the Secretary of War saying you're gonna have to tell him to get out. And he's gotta be out by, here we go, here it is. He's gotta be out, by the end of the year, and he was still there. And then in the 1830s, I think it was, and I'd have to go to my research notes to give you exact dates, there was another move. And he, do you know?
Oh, well, a
The
good
dates?
deal of his land was deeded to him as a favor from the Department of the Army or the federal government because of what he did as the provisioner for the Fort Armstrong.
Well, you see, but in both of those letters, and maybe that's where they got their wires crossed, both of them said he is on federal property and he has to get off.
And that might have been why they deeded it to him, because I live on 42nd Avenue, and that land was all owned by George Davenport at one time. I don't know how far south he owned. But
He bought up all of Saukenuk.
Yeah, and a good deal of that was given to him as a, I don't know if a gift is the right word, but for his services that he did as the provisioner to the Fort Armstrong.
Is,
I had his will in my abstract.
And that's where.
So I know what brooch his wife left to a daughter, and I know what brooch she left to another son, so it's all detailed in there.
Wow.
And he used to own, Davenport used to own Longview Park and Broadway District and.
Bailey owned, as a matter of fact, that was another early burial ground. Bailey's pasture, where the water slide is now. When they put that water slide in, what was that, 5-6 years ago, they were uncovering human remains that had to be removed. And they were non-Indians. But that was another early burial ground. What really became Rock Island. Instead of out here, we went towards Davenport, that would be Rock Island.
I guess, the city had trouble getting that land to develop because the Davenports and their descendants wouldn't sell it.
Well, he owned, of course, he was Johnny on the spot here, you know. He and Russell Farnham were some of the first white people to buy what's now Saukanook in 1829, when they first did the first land sale of this area in October of 1829. And they bought up a pretty good sized chunk of land, including, you know, what's now State Park.
Some of my neighbors are on.
Do you have neighbors on here?
Lawson's, yes.
Now, when did they die?
No, they're not there. Yes, there are.
It's a different
Mary
one.
J. Lawson
It's a different
and
one.
Sarah J.
I will ask.
That's a big stone relatives.
What's the year?
Mary J. died in 1898. She was 26 years old.
Sarah and Mary Jane.
Sarah J. died in 1873, the wife of B.F. Lawson.
Is there anybody ever leave decorations like at Memorial Day or anything, there's no commemoration?
But there's, you know, it's kind of sad. You go out there, there's really very little left standing. I think there are maybe 2 or 3 stones left standing. Even stones that were there when I first came here 30 years ago are gone. Well, they're not gone. We have them. They're just there in storage, and I don't know if they got knocked over by the mowers or exactly what the.
There's actually a few, quite a few out there.
Are there
They're
still?
usually hidden inside the lilies. That's where they are. The
That's
lilies
right.
hide.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
And that was a part of that
we
Eagle
walk
Scouts
through there
project.
quite often with the dog coming over this way. In the past year, though, the names have started eroding very quickly. I mean, there's one Confederate soldier out there. He died in the early 1900s, but his rank and you know everything.
That's
is
Mr. Ailes, I think.
And there's a really beautiful 4-sided one that has a whole family on it, right at the edge of the woods.
Right. That's
And you
kind
can
of-
barely read it now. Last year you could read it really well, now you can't.
Well, when we were little playing in there were a lot of stones.
Now, do you have those stones on your list? The ones that are, all the
Everything
ones
that's
that
in
are
the
still in the
cemetery,
cemetery?
everything that was taken from the cemetery that was returned, but then, you know, perhaps there were ones that were taken that weren't returned, so it's a very incomplete list. And even Hawberg's interview with David Sears in 1918, I mean, if I look on this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, yeah, they only talk about 18 burials out there. So that's very incomplete also.
Is there any chance you could ever come upon any of their, descendants and if someone has an unusual name that you maybe could talk?
Sure, I suppose that would be a,
It might be a long, hard
You
struggle.
go on Ancestry.com and look up some of those names in the 1900 census, the 1890 census, the 1880 census, and you could,
There is no 1890 census.
well, whatever.
there isn't?
It burned. It was national, I think, in